Tonight we're going to tell a slow, calm, unhurried story about an actor, about the way a career can rise and fall and rise again, and about what that looks like from the inside, over the long stretch of a life. There's no twist coming and no mystery to solve. It's just the quiet, ordinary, remarkable story of a man named John Travolta, told gently, from the beginning to now, at a pace made for drifting off. So there's nothing you need to do with any of this. If you're here to fall asleep, this is a good moment to settle in properly. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been sitting all day, and let your hands rest, and let your jaw unclench. You can follow the story closely, or let it blur into the background, or fall asleep somewhere in the middle and never reach the end. All of those are completely fine. That is exactly what this is for. Before we go any further, one small thing, and then I won't interrupt again. If this voice helps you get to sleep tonight, leaving a like costs you nothing and helps other people who are lying awake right now find their way here. And if you'd like this to be here again tomorrow night, you can subscribe. That's all. Now let's not think about any of that again, and let's begin, slowly, at the start. He was born in February of 1954 in a town called Englewood in New Jersey, which is a short way across the river from New York City, but a whole world away from the fame that was coming. He was the youngest of 6 children, the baby of a big, warm, crowded, performing family. His father sold tires and had once played semi-professional football. His mother was an actress and a singer who had performed in a radio vocal group and directed plays and eventually taught drama in a high school. So the house he grew up in full of performance, full of older brothers and sisters who sang and acted, full of the idea that getting up in front of people and being someone else was simply a thing that people in this family did. It's worth pausing on that, because it shapes everything. A lot of famous performers come from homes where nobody understood them, where the wanting to perform was strange and unwelcome. His was the opposite. He was the youngest child in a family where performing was the water they all swam in, and he was, by all accounts, the one the others doted on. The little one, the charming one, the one everybody expected good things from. He grew up loved, and he grew up watching people he loved get up and perform, and he wanted from very early to do the same. Let your breathing slow here. There's no urgency to any of this. Nothing in this story needs to be rushed. He was not, it should be said, a child who thrived at school. He left high school at 16, which in the 1970s was a genuinely risky thing to do, to pursue acting, a career with almost no security and enormous odds against it. But he had the thing that no school can give you and no school can take away, which is that he had decided. He knew what he wanted with the particular unreasonable certainty of a young person who cannot yet imagine failing. And he had the family behind him, which helped, and he had, it turned out, a real and unusual talent, which helped more. He started the way most actors of that era started. Small parts, summer stock, television commercials, the long, unglamorous apprenticeship of showing up and auditioning and being turned down and showing up again. He appeared in a touring production of a musical called Grease, a detail we'll come back to, because life has a way of folding back on itself. He made his way, slowly, up the ordinary ladder, and then, in the mid-1970s, he got a part on a television show that would make him, almost overnight, a face that a whole country recognized. The show was called Welcome Back, Kotter, and he played a character named Vinnie Barbarino, a sweet, dim, impossibly charming Brooklyn teenager, one of a group of remedial students in an inner-city high school, and something about him on that show simply leapt off the screen. He was beautiful in the specific way that television loves, and he had a warmth and a lightness and a comic timing that couldn't quite be taught. Teenage girls across America fell for him. He became, in the language of the time, a teen idol. His face on magazine covers, on posters taped to bedroom walls, on lunchboxes. He even had a hit pop single, a song that climbed into the top 10, because that's the kind of thing that happened to teen idols in the 1970s. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. None of this is a test. You don't have to hold on to any of it. But the teen idol thing, as sweet as it was not what was coming. What was coming was something much bigger, and it arrived in 1977 when he was 23 years old in the form of a film about a young man in Brooklyn who works a dead-end job in a paint shop all week and lives entirely for the hours on Saturday night when he goes to a disco and, on the dance floor, becomes for a few hours, the most alive and admired person in the room. The film was called Saturday Night Fever, and it is difficult now to convey how enormous it was and how completely it belonged to him. He played a character named Tony Manero, and he was electric in it. Not just the dancing, though the dancing was extraordinary. The white suit, the pointed finger, the images that became so famous they stopped even needing the film attached to them. But underneath the dancing, there was a real performance, a real young man, restless and trapped and yearning, and Travolta found all of it. He had spent 9 months learning to dance for that film. 9 months. And it shows there's a commitment in it, a seriousness underneath the glitter, that lifted the whole thing from a dance movie into something that lasted. The film made disco a mainstream, worldwide phenomenon. Its soundtrack, full of the Bee Gees, became one of the best-selling albums in the history of recorded music. And Travolta, at 23, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor, one of the youngest men ever nominated in that category at the time. He had gone, in the space of about 2 years, from a touring musical and a sitcom to the very top of the film world. Breathe out slowly. Let the shoulders drop again if they've crept up. And then, the very next year, 1978, he did it again with the film version of that musical he'd once toured in, Grease. He played Danny Zuko, the leather-jacketed leader of a 1950s high school gang, opposite Olivia Newton-John, and the two of them together created something that has genuinely never gone away. Grease became the highest-grossing musical film of its era, and one of those rare films that simply enters the permanent bloodstream of the culture. The songs, the images, the whole sunlit, nostalgic world of it, still known and loved by people who were born decades after it came out. So there he was, in 1978, 24 years old. Two of the biggest films of the decade, back to back. An Oscar nomination. The face of an era. Disco and Grease. Dancing and singing, the most famous young man in American movies. If you had stopped the story there and asked anyone what came next, they would have said everything. A long, golden career, decades at the top. That is not what happened. And the fact that it's not what happened is the whole reason this story is worth telling slowly, in the dark, tonight. Let the room go soft around that for a moment. A young man at the very top of the world, at 24, with no idea that the ground is about to shift. Before we follow the fall, we have to go back a year, to something that happened while he was rising, because it's the part of the story that almost nobody puts first, and it should be first, because it explains a great deal about the man underneath the fame. While he was making the film that made him a star, and in the years right around it, his personal life held a grief most people knew nothing about. During the filming of an early television movie, before the enormous fame, he had fallen in love with an actress named Diana Hyland. She was 18 years older than he was. By every account, it was a real and deep love, not a young man's passing thing. And she was ill. She had breast cancer. And she died in 1977, the same year Saturday Night Fever was released. The same year the whole world was falling in love with him. She died, reportedly, in his arms. She was 41 years old. Sit with the shape of that for a moment, gently. At the exact moment his public life became a fairy tale, the white suit, the Oscar nomination, the adoration of millions, his private life held a loss most young men never have to carry. The image of him from that period is all light and motion and glamour. Underneath it was a young man who had just watched someone he loved die. Those two things were happening in the same person, at the same time, and only one of them was visible. It's worth holding on to because it's the quiet key to the whole story. The public arc, up, down, up, is dramatic and clean and satisfying, but the private life underneath it ran on a completely different track, one that had nothing to do with box office numbers, and it's a reminder, useful at this hour, that the story the world tells about a person and the life that person is actually living are almost never the same story. Let your breathing follow that. Slow and unhurried. There's nothing here to fix. Now, the fall. And it's worth understanding that it wasn't a crash. It wasn't a scandal or a disaster or a single catastrophic mistake. It was something much more ordinary and much more frightening than that, because it's the kind of thing that can happen to anyone, slowly, without any single moment you can point to. It was a drift, a long, slow, gradual slide from the very top toward the very bottom, one disappointing film at a time. In 1980, he made a film called Urban Cowboy about the world of Texas honky-tonks and mechanical bulls, and it did well. It even sparked a brief fashion for country and western style, the way his films kept sparking crazes. So at the turn of the decade, he still looked untouchable, but then the choices and the luck began to turn. There was a sequel to Saturday Night Fever made in 1983 called Staying Alive. It did not work. There were other films through the early and middle 80s, films most people have now forgotten, that came and went without making much impression. Some were poorly received, some simply vanished. And here is the cruel arithmetic of a film career. A star is only as bankable as his last few films, and once a couple of them fail, the good scripts stop coming. And once the good scripts stop coming, you're left choosing between weaker and weaker material, and the weaker material fails too, and each failure makes the next good part less likely. It's a downward spiral with its own terrible logic, and it doesn't require you to do anything wrong. It just requires a couple of things not to work, and then momentum does the rest. By the middle of the 1980s, the man who had been the biggest young star in the world was, in the brutal language of Hollywood, cooling off. Not finished, not yet, but no longer hot, no longer first choice, no longer the name that got a film made. The Oscar-nominated star of Saturday Night Fever was becoming a man whose best years were spoken about in the past tense. Let yourself sink a little deeper. This is the low part of the story, and it's told gently, because there's nothing frightening in it when you're lying safe in the dark. It's just a life, doing what lives do. There was a brief upswing at the end of the decade, and it's an interesting one because it kept him working but did nothing for his prestige. In 1989, he made a light comedy called Look Who's Talking, a film about a baby whose thoughts are spoken aloud by a famous voice. And it was a surprise hit, popular enough to spawn 2 sequels. So he wasn't out of work, but it was not the kind of film that makes anyone take an actor seriously again. If anything, it confirmed the sense that he had become a lightweight, a star of undemanding comedies, a long way from the young man who'd earned an Oscar nomination. He was working, but he was, in the eyes of the industry, a has-been. That word actually attached to him. There were films from this period that went straight to video without a cinema release at all. A genuine humiliation for someone who had once been at the very top. And this went on, not for a year or two, but for the better part of a decade. That's the part that's hard to feel from the outside, and worth slowing down for. It's one thing to have a bad year. It's another to have 10 of them, to spend your late 20s and your 30s, the years that should have been your prime, watching the thing you were best at slip further and further out of reach, while the world that had adored you quietly moved on and mostly forgot you were there. He was still young. He was still talented, and it looked for a long, long time as though it was simply over, as though he'd had his moment, an enormous one, and used it up, and that was going to be that. Let all of that go soft now. There's nothing to solve here. It's just the long middle of a story, the part that in a film would pass in a musical montage, but that in a life is lived one ordinary disappointing day at a time. There's a lesson buried in that stretch, and it's a gentle one to rest on. We tell stories about careers as though they're clean arcs, the rise, the fall, the comeback, but those shapes only exist in hindsight. Living inside the fall, you don't know it's the middle of a redemption story. You don't know there's a third act coming. For all he knew, standing in the middle of the 1980s, the fall was simply the end, and the earlier fame was just the sad, bright thing he'd have to be reminded of for the rest of his life. Nobody living through the low part gets to know it's temporary. That knowledge is a gift only the future can give, and it can't hand it backward. So when we say his career fell and then rose again, remember that the man himself, in the falling, had no promise that the rising would come. He just kept working. He took the comedies, he took the films that went to video, he kept turning up. And whether that was faith or stubbornness or simply not knowing what else to do, it turned out to matter enormously, because it meant that when the one phone call finally came, he was still there to answer it. Breathe out slowly. Let your hands go heavy. The phone call, when it came from a young director almost nobody had heard of, who was about to become one of the most famous filmmakers in the world. His name was Quentin Tarantino, and in the early 1990s, he was a video store clerk turned filmmaker with exactly one film behind him and a head full of the movies of the past. And Tarantino had something that turned out to be the key to the whole thing. He had grown up loving John Travolta. To Tarantino, Travolta wasn't a has-been, a fallen star, a punchline. He was an icon, one of the electric presences of the films Tarantino had worshipped as a young man. And Tarantino wanted him for his new film, badly, over the objections of more or less everyone, because the studios did not want to pay for a star whose value had sunk so low. The film was Pulp Fiction, and the part was Vincent Vega, a philosophical, heroin-addled hitman, a man who is somehow both menacing and ridiculous, who has long conversations about hamburgers and foot massages in between acts of sudden violence. It was a strange, funny, dangerous, completely unexpected role, and it asked Travolta to do things he'd never been asked to do, and to trust a young director everyone else thought was a gamble. And there's a scene, everyone remembers it, where his character dances. A twist contest in a 1950s-themed restaurant, and this heavy-aging, dangerous man gets up and dances, and suddenly, for a moment, you see it. The ghost of the young man in the white suit, the greatest dancer in American movies, buried inside this ruined character, flickering back to life. It was Tarantino reaching back through 15 years and pulling the old magic forward, and it worked so completely that the whole audience, the whole world, felt the circuit close. The dancer was still in there. He'd been in there the whole time. Let the room go soft around that image. A man everyone had written off, dancing again, and the world remembering all at once who he was. Pulp Fiction came out in 1994, and it was a phenomenon, one of the most talked about, most influential films of its decade, a film that changed how movies were made and watched. And at the center of it, reborn, was John Travolta. He was nominated for the Academy Award again, his second nomination, 17 years after his first, which is its own quiet miracle. 2 Oscar nominations separated by an entire lost decade. Overnight, he went from a man whose films went straight to video to one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood, back at the very top of the list. His price restored, the good scripts flooding back in. It is genuinely one of the most complete comebacks in the history of the movies. People in Hollywood still use it as the reference point. The Travolta comeback, the thing that proves it can happen, that a career pronounced dead can come all the way back. For a second time at 40, he was one of the biggest stars in the world, and this time, he'd earned it twice, which is a thing almost nobody gets to do. Let yourself sink a little deeper. The story has turned, and it's a good feeling to rest inside. The long, delayed relief of it, the sense of something owed finally being paid. The years after Pulp Fiction were golden again. He made a run of successful, well-liked films, a comedy about a Hollywood-obsessed gangster, action films, dramas. He was, for a stretch of the mid and late 90s, exactly what he'd been in the late 70s, a genuine movie star, at the center of things, bankable and beloved. He had done the impossible. He had climbed all the way up, fallen all the way down, and climbed all the way up again, and there can't be more than a handful of people in the whole history of the movies who've made that particular round trip. And then, because a life is longer than a highlight reel, the story kept going, into calmer, more mixed, more human territory, the way all stories do once the dramatic arc has spent itself. There were more films, some good, some not. There was one, in particular, a science fiction film he'd wanted to make for years, a passion project that became one of the most mocked films of its era, a reminder that even after the greatest comeback in Hollywood history, you can still make something that doesn't work, because nobody's judgment is perfect and no career is a straight line even after it's turned. He kept working through the 2000s and beyond in a wide range of things. No longer the hottest star in the world, but a permanent, established presence. A man who had been famous for so long that his fame had simply become a fact of the landscape. Let all of that settle. Let it drift. And underneath the later career, as always, the private life ran on its own track, and it held more than its share of sorrow. He had married an actress named Kelly Preston in 1991, and by every account it was a long and devoted marriage. They had children, and they endured a loss almost too heavy to describe. Their teenage son, Jet, died in 2009. There is no arc that makes sense of a thing like that, no comeback, no third act. It's simply the worst thing that can happen to a parent, and it happened to them, and they carried it. And then in 2020, Kelly Preston died of breast cancer. The same illness that had taken Diana Hyland, the woman he'd loved and lost more than 40 years earlier, at the very start of his fame. The same disease, bookending his adult life, taking the woman he loved at the beginning and the woman he loved at the end. There's no meaning in that, no pattern that redeems it. It's just one of the terrible symmetries that a long life sometimes contains, the kind of thing that would seem too cruel and too neat if you found it in a novel. Let that be held gently in the quiet. Not dwelt on, just acknowledged the way you'd acknowledge a hard thing in the life of someone you'd come to know, and then let it rest. Because the point of telling you all of this, the grief alongside the glory, is not to make the story sad, it's to make it true. The clean public arc, the rise and fall and rise, is real, and it's remarkable, and it's genuinely inspiring in the way those stories are. But it's only the surface. Underneath it was a whole human life, with losses the box office numbers knew nothing about, running quietly along beneath the fame the entire time. Breathe out slowly. Let the shoulders drop once more. We should spend a little unhurried time on Greece, on its own, because it turned out to be the strangest and most durable thing he ever made, and its afterlife is a gentle thing to think about in the dark. When it came out in 1978, it was, on paper, a piece of nostalgia, a musical looking back at the 1950s from the vantage of the late 70s, all pastel cars and Letterman jackets, and a version of teenage life that was already 20 years gone when it was filmed. It should, by rights, have dated twice over by now, a 70s film about the 50s, seen from a world decades past both.
And instead it simply refused to age.
It became one of those rare films that each new generation of children discovers on its own, that plays at sleepovers and on holiday afternoons, whose songs are known by people who have never sat down and watched the whole thing, whose images have soaked so far into the culture that they feel less like a film and more like a shared memory everybody somehow has. Travolta was at the center of that, young and impossibly charismatic, and it means that for a huge number of people around the world, he is frozen permanently at 24 in a leather jacket singing. It doesn't matter what he did before or after. For millions, that's who he is and always will be. A fixed point, a piece of the permanent furniture of popular culture, eternally young in a film that never gets old. There's something poignant in that, if you sit with it. To be caught forever at your most golden moment in a thing that outlives everything else you do. He went on to have an entire turbulent career, a fall, a legendary comeback, a long later life full of joy and terrible loss, and still, to a great many people, he is simply Danny Zuko, forever, and always will be. The person kept living. The image stopped at 24 and stayed there, smiling in the sunlight, while the actual man walked on into everything that came next. Let the room go soft around that. A young man, fixed forever in a summer that was already imaginary when they filmed it. There's a thread worth following about the specific kind of stardom he had, because it was of a particular era, and that era is gone. He became famous in a time before the internet, before the endless flow of images, when a movie star was a genuinely remote and magical figure, someone you saw on an enormous screen in a dark room, or on a poster, or on the cover of a magazine, and almost nowhere else. The distance was part of the magic. You didn't see stars stumbling out of cars or posting their breakfast. They descended occasionally from somewhere far above, enormous and glowing, and then withdrew. That remoteness let them be dreamed about in a way that's almost impossible now. Travolta was one of the last stars made entirely by that old machine. The machine of scarcity, of distance, of the single overwhelming image on the giant screen. And that may be part of why his fall was so steep and his comeback so mythic. In a culture of scarcity, a star is either present or absent, at the top or forgotten. There's no middle register, no constant low hum of visibility to keep you half remembered. When the machine stopped pointing at him, he simply disappeared from view, almost completely, in a way that would be hard to do now. And when it swung back with Pulp Fiction, the return was total and sudden, a resurrection rather than a gradual climb. The all-or-nothing shape of his story is partly the shape of the fame of that particular vanished time. Let your breathing lengthen. In and out, longer. There's nothing to hold on to here. It's worth saying something, too, about what it actually takes to survive the middle part, the lost decade, with yourself intact, because that's the part that gets skipped, and it's the part that's hardest. Anyone can enjoy the top. The top is easy. The test of a person, if there is one, is the long stretch when the thing you were is gone and the thing you'll become hasn't arrived, and you don't know if it ever will, and you have to get up anyway and do work that nobody much wants from you, for years, without the fuel of applause. That's where most people quietly give up. Not dramatically, just by stopping, by deciding it's over and letting it be over. He didn't stop. Whatever else you make of him, across that whole gray decade he kept showing up, kept taking the parts, kept working in films that went straight to video, kept being an actor even when being an actor had stopped being glamorous or rewarding. And it's easy to say from here that of course he did, because we know the comeback was waiting. But he didn't know. He kept going without the knowledge, which is the only kind of persistence that actually counts. Persistence when you know it'll pay off isn't persistence, it's just patience. Persistence when you have no idea whether it'll pay off, and you keep going anyway. That's the real con. And in the end, it's what put him in the room when Tarantino came looking. Let that settle in the quiet. The quiet, unglamorous work of continuing, with no promise attached. Let's spend some slow time now on the thing at the center of it all. The dancing. Because it's the thread that runs through the entire life, from the very top to the very bottom and back. And it's a lovely thing to rest your mind on. Watch him move in Saturday Night Fever, and you're watching someone who has become, for those minutes, pure expression. A young man who is awkward and trapped and inarticulate in every other part of his life, and who, on the dance floor, becomes fluent, becomes eloquent, becomes fully himself. That was the genius of casting him, and the genius of what he did with it. The dancing wasn't decoration. It was the character's only language, the one place he could say what he couldn't otherwise say. And then, 15 years later, in the depths of his professional exile, it was the dancing that brought him back. Tarantino didn't just cast him in Pulp Fiction. He gave him a dance scene, deliberately, knowingly, as a kind of resurrection. He reached back to the thing Travolta had been famous for, the thing the world had loved and then forgotten, and he put it on screen again, and the whole audience felt the old magic reignite. The comeback was, quite literally, built on a dance. There's something almost mythic in that if you let yourself feel it. The gift that made him, the gift the world forgot, the gift that, when a young director finally remembered it, brought him all the way back from the dead. It's the kind of shape you find in old stories, the hero's one true talent, dormant through the dark years, blazing back to life at the moment of return. And it was real. It happened. You can watch both dances, the one from 1977 and the one from 1994, and see the same man 17 years apart at the top and then again at the top, with all that falling in between, and the body remembering both times exactly what to do. Let your breathing follow that. Slow, unhurried. The body remembering what it knows. We should say a little about the comeback itself as a phenomenon, because it became bigger than him. It became a kind of permanent idea in the culture. And there's something restful in thinking about why. After Pulp Fiction, a Travolta comeback stopped being a specific event and became a common noun, a thing people reach for whenever anyone in any field returns from being written off. It entered the language because it filled a need, because people badly want to believe that being counted out isn't final. And here was a clean, famous, undeniable example that it isn't always. His return gave the whole culture a piece of evidence for hope, and the culture held on to it, and uses it still. That's a strange kind of second fame. To become, yourself, the proof of a general principle. He's not just an actor who came back. He's the thing people point to when they want to argue that coming back is possible. His name does work in sentences that have nothing to do with movies. And that's a more durable kind of immortality than any single film, because it's woven into how people talk about second chances everywhere. There's a reason that idea lands so deeply, and it's worth naming softly. Almost everyone is carrying some private version of a thing they think is finished, a dream they've quietly filed away, a talent they've stopped using, a version of themselves they've decided is in the past. And a story like his doesn't argue with that decision directly. It just sits there, quietly, as a counterexample, a reminder that finished is a judgment, not a fact, and that judgments, unlike facts, can turn out to be wrong. Let all of that go loose now. It's not a question for tonight, just a soft possibility to rest against. There's one more small thing worth telling, because it's a lovely image, and it belongs to the good years. Long before the fall, at the height of his first fame, he was once asked to dance at a party with a princess. It was the early 1980s at a formal event, and Princess Diana, herself one of the most photographed and dreamed about people in the world, reportedly asked him to dance, and they did, in front of everyone. The movie star and the princess, two people at the absolute center of the world's attention, turning slowly across a floor. It's the kind of thing that sounds invented. It happened, and it's a nice image to hold precisely because it's so purely of the good times. A moment of uncomplicated glamour before the fall, before the losses, when he was simply young and famous and beloved and the world arranged fairy tale evenings around him. Every life has moments like that, though usually smaller. Nights that seem, at the time, like they might just be the ordinary texture of things, and turn out later to have been the peak, the golden part, the thing you'd return to if you could. He got a particularly bright one. Most of us get quieter ones, but we all get some, and they're worth remembering kindly, even when the arc has moved on past them. Let that image stay a moment, and then let it drift. A slow dance, long ago, at the top of the world. There's a broader thing worth turning over gently, because it's the reason his story means something to people who've never danced a step and never will. Almost everyone, at some point, has a version of the fall. Not on that scale, and not in public, but the shape is universal. The sense that your best time might be behind you, that the thing you were good at is slipping away, that the world has quietly moved on and stopped calling. It happens to people in careers, in bodies, in relationships. It's one of the most common and least discussed fears there is, the fear that you peaked, that it's over, that what's left is just the long, slow afterward. And what his story says to that fear, not as a promise, because it isn't one, but as a possibility, is that the arc isn't always finished when it looks finished, that the fall can be the middle rather than the end, that the thing you were, dormant and forgotten, can come back, sometimes from the least expected direction, sometimes because one person who loved what you did decades ago is now in a position to reach back and pull you forward. It doesn't happen to everyone. That's the honest part, and it matters. Most falls are just falls. Most people written off stay written off. The Travolta comeback is famous precisely because it's rare, because it's the exception, not the rule. But the fact that it's rare doesn't make it false. It happened, and its happening means the door is never quite as closed as it feels from inside the dark room, not always openable, but never quite as sealed as despair insists. That's a good thing to carry toward sleep. Not a guarantee, just an open question where you thought there was a closed one. Let all of that soften and drift. There's a quiet question underneath this whole story that's worth turning over slowly, and it's this. What is a career, really, measured against a life? Because we've been telling his story as a career, up, down, up, as though the films and the box office and the fame were the main thing. That's how these stories are always told. But step back, and the career looks smaller and stranger. The dazzling first fame lasted a handful of years. The fall lasted about a decade. The comeback was a single film that changed everything, and then decades more of ordinary working life. Some hits, some misses, gradually settling into the long plateau of being an established name. Laid out flat, most of the career is the unglamorous middle and the long later stretch, not the peaks. The peaks are brief. They always are. And running underneath all of it, barely touching the career at all, was the actual life. The love and loss at the very start, before most of the fame, the marriage and the children, the unimaginable loss of a child, the loss of a wife. Those things don't appear on any list of films. They don't rise or fall with the box office. They're the real weather of a life, and they were happening the whole time, on their own schedule, indifferent to whether he was hot or cold in Hollywood that year, which is worth sitting with gently, because it's true of everyone, not just the famous. We tell the story of a life as though the visible achievements are the plot, but the achievements are the surface. The real life, the loves, the losses, the private griefs and joys that no one else can see, runs underneath on a completely different track, and it's the track that actually matters, and it's the one no one applauds or writes about or ranks. Let that settle. There's nothing to do with it. It's just true. And it's quietly comforting at this hour, because it means your own real life, the one underneath whatever the world sees or doesn't see of you, is the one that counts, and it's yours. And it's happening right now, in the dark, as you rest. Let your body get heavier. Let the mattress take all of it. Let's go back, one last time, to the very beginning, to the crowded, warm house in New Jersey, and the youngest of 6 children watching his brothers and sisters perform. There's a way of seeing his whole life as a single long arc that started in that house. The boy who wanted more than anything to do what the people he loved were doing, who left school at 16 with nothing but that wanting, who got everything, then lost most of it, then got it back. And through all of it, from the touring production of Grease as a young unknown, to the white suit, to the lost decade, to the dance floor in Pulp Fiction, to the long, steady later years, through all of it, the same person. The same warmth that leapt off the screen in a sitcom in 1975. The same thing, whatever it was, that made a young director 15 years later refuse to believe the star was dead. Fame is strange that way. It arrives, and it magnifies a person into something enormous and public and not quite real, and then it can recede and leave the person more or less where they started, a human being with a talent and a family and their share of joy and of grief. Travolta had more fame than almost anyone, and lost more of it than almost anyone, and got more of it back than almost anyone. And underneath all that motion, all that rising and falling, there was just a man who loved to perform, the way his mother had, the way his brothers and sisters had, in the warm, crowded house where it all began. That's where we'll leave him tonight. Not at the top or the bottom of any arc. Just as a person. One who was loved, and lost people he loved, and worked, and kept working, and got in the end more than one life's worth of rising and falling, and carried all of it, the glory and the grief together, the way everyone carries everything, quietly, underneath whatever the world happens to see. You don't need to remember any of it. Not the films, not the dates, not the names. None of this was a test, and there's nothing waiting for you on the other side of it. Your breathing has already slowed without you asking it to. The weight of your body has already settled into whatever's holding it up. The small tensions in the jaw, in the hands, in the place behind the eyes, have already begun to let go on their own. Whatever your own arc looks like tonight, rising, falling, or somewhere in the long, uncertain middle, it isn't finished, and it doesn't need to be understood right now. There's nothing to solve before morning. There's nothing left to follow now. The story is over, and there's nothing more you need to listen to. What comes next is just soft, gentle sound. No more words, nothing to follow, only a quiet hum to carry you through the rest of the night. So let go of everything now. Let the last of the day come loose, and let this gentle sound stay with you until morning.